DND number 11, Circle of Life in Jesus' Name, Part 3, Chapter 18. It's November 8th, Friday afternoon, Rosewood Sports Arena, Los Angeles, California. Gabe looked around the back area of the Rosewood Sports Arena. It was the same as it had been way back last spring, but it felt different. So much had happened since that time. His life had changed completely. The limo came to a halt, and the family stepped out. Not everyone in the family rode in the limo. Young Eric and Jordan brought their own car, as did Desi and Alec. However, they all unloaded in the back, special entrance, and their cars were parked by their assigned agents. Security was tight. Young Eric and Jordan's car was filled with large boxes of goodies, and he unloaded onto some rolling carts to take them to concessions. As Gabe, Taylor, Ricky, and Bree made their way inside, a second limo pulled up with Grandmaster Keno, Shelley, 5 kids, and Bella and Em, and Jeffy and Cam. Behind them were Logan and Melody, who unloaded and went immediately to help with the 5 Keno children because Melody reminded Logan more than once that she was working today. Next to pull up were Joey, Breeze, and their kids, Sophia, Kelson, and Ledger. And right behind them, Jeff and Mickey Davis and their boys, Daniel and Jeremy. Already at the arena were Jason and Angel, Justin and Lori, and Kimmy and Jensen. Once more, JoJo had an away game, and his father went to Colorado to support him. Those who'd unloaded in the back intended to be in the room designated for the prayer before the match, and most of them headed there. They would pray together, and then Gabe's people would all make their way to the arena and take their seats in the VIP section. Some of their people would be arriving later through the front doors and would also be seated in the VIP section. People like Melody's family and Jordan's family, and a few of the masters who helped in the training. Also due to arrive were Toby Nash and Caroline and their daughter Grace. Unfortunately, their son Brody wasn't able to get away. Gabe looked around as he entered, and sure enough, Isla August was headed straight to him. This time, Gabe smiled at her warmly as she approached. "And here he is, everyone, the man of the hour." "Hello, Gabriel Tanner," Isla greeted brightly. Gabe nodded. "Hey, everyone. How you feeling today?" "Feeling good." "Ready to win?" "I'll give it my best shot," he said. The Kenos had a fast rule that you never predict the outcome of a fight, so he was careful to sound humble. However, Gabe was feeling pretty strong and pretty confident. "Well, you have a lot of people in your corner," Isla said. "Like millions." Gabe smiled. "Thanks, everyone. I'll do my best to make you proud. I'm just grateful that I was able to recover from my injuries a few months ago and be strong enough to compete. God is good." "Yes, he is," Isla chirped. "Okay, well, we'll let you go do whatever you do before a fight. Get your game face on and all that. Go Team Gabe." Gabe smiled and waved. "Thanks, everyone." Isla headed behind him. He heard her say the name of his opponent, Tony Omori, and Gabe figured the guy had just arrived. He turned to see, but there were too many people in the large corridor behind him, including Mr. Keno. "Straight to the locker room," Ricky said firmly. Gabe nodded. "Yes, sir." He turned and headed to his assigned room. Meanwhile, young Eric had Jules' concession items in several large boxes on a couple of rolling carts, and he nodded at Logan. "Hey, how about a hand?" "I want to tag along," Jordan said. "I know I'm a hassle 'cause I slow you down, but do you mind? Mom's going to ask me how her stuff was displayed, and I'd like to check it out firsthand." Young Eric smiled at her. "Oh, I don't mind, babe. Whatever you want, you get. Within reason," he added with a smile. They went through the back hallways to an elevator and went upstairs and then around to the front concession area. The concession manager clapped her hands together when they arrived. "Oh, I can't wait to see the things you're bringing. I was told to save a prime location for them," she exclaimed. Jordan watched while the manager bossed Eric and Logan around, telling them where to place the extras in the coolers and where to place the ones for immediate sale. It was obvious the manager had no idea she was bossing around a soon-to-be movie star and soon-to-be Grammy winner, Jordan was sure. Jordan eyed the display, took pictures, and sent them immediately to her mother. By the time they were finished, the arena was already filling up. One of the vendors was already heading out with a tray filled with ice-cold drinks. Eric, Jordan, and Logan were just heading across the lobby area when they heard yelling and a giant crash, and they turned to see a couple of kids, maybe about 11 or 12, laughing and running away from the vendor. Eric thought about going after the kids, but instead decided the vendor, who'd just been crashed into, needed help. "Stay here," he said to Jordan as he left her by the steps leading down to floor level. He and Logan both went to help the vendor, who was an older man. Eric knelt down beside him. "Are you okay?" The man nodded. "Darn kids. It's not the first time they've done this." Young Eric sighed as he took one arm and Logan took the other, and they pulled the man to his feet. "Well, how many other times?" Eric asked. "Too many to count. I think they do it on purpose." "Well, how do a couple of kids get here to the arena and then get in? I mean, it's not cheap." "I think they come with their parents, who are some big-wig season ticket holders, and the kids are just spoiled little rich kids who get off on causing trouble. I seen them grab a wallet from a man once, but nobody would believe me." Young Eric shook his head. "So, what's your name?" "Jeremiah Cobb, young man." Young Eric smiled. "Well, Mr. Cobb, I'm Eric, and this is my brother Logan. How long you been working here?" "Oh, I'd say going on about 20 years now. I started working here when I retired from driving a school bus." "Well, 20 years is a long time. How long did you drive the school bus?" 25 years. The three looked up when a 40-ish man came around the corner, a frown on his face. "Again, Jeremiah?" "Yes, sir." "If you can't keep your balance, maybe we need to get someone else." "Oh, I can keep my balance all right if those kids would stay away." "How come I never see these kids you keep talking about?" Eric's eyes narrowed. "You don't believe him?" "I don't think this is any of your business." "Well, I do. All you have to do is get security to pull the security camera videos, and you'll see the kids." The man picked up his walkie-talkie from his hip. "Stacy, we need immediate cleanup, mops and cones at the front lobby near the blue concessions." He looked back up at the two young men. "I don't really have time for this." He then turned back to Jeremiah. "Go fill your tray again, and I'm going to have to dock you for the cost of those drinks." "Seriously?" Logan said. The man looked up. "Thank you for your assistance, but our policies are not up for discussion right now." "Well, they will be," young Eric promised. He pulled out his wallet and removed $200 and handed them to Jeremiah. "Here's your tip, and thanks for the information, Jeremiah. Can I get your number?" Young Eric pulled out his phone and punched in Jeremiah's information. He smiled at the man. "And here's my card. If you need anything, give me a call." Jeremiah looked down at the name and back up quickly, his eyes going wide. "Oh, I'm sorry I didn't recognize you." Eric smiled. "It's no problem. I'm glad I did recognize you. A good man." The supervisor looked closer at the two young men. "So, who are you?" "Eric Keno III, and my cousin Logan Adams, and we'll be seeing you soon." They all turned at the sound of more yelling, but this time it was a voice they recognized. Jordan. "Let go, you little brat! Oh!" she yelled as she went down. They whirled and headed toward the stairs. One of the kids had grabbed one of Jordan's crutches and yanked hard. He took off with the crutch as Jordan fell face down and slid down several steps. Eric and Logan ran to her and pulled her up to sit on the stairs. "Baby, are you okay?" "Yes, I'm okay. Now go get that little brat and get my crutch and bring him to me so I can beat his butt." Eric nodded. "Logan, you go that way. I'll go this way. Jordan, you call Jason and tell him we need some security to help with a couple of delinquents." Logan took off after the kid and went to the right. Eric took off after the kid, then went down the stairs and into the arena. He found him, pretending to be hobbling along on one crutch along the aisle. Eric ran toward him. The kid looked up and laughed. As Eric approached, the kid picked up the crutch and swung it at him, narrowly missing a woman sitting in the front row of the upper deck. Young Eric grabbed the crutch and jerked it from the kid's hands and threw it down and lunged for the kid. All this got the attention of the crowd. The kid jumped up onto the narrow ledge that was the boundary for the upper deck and ran along it as the crowd gasped and held their breath. Young Eric followed suit, jumping up and running. He caught up to the kid in only a few strides. As he neared, the kid started waving his arms as he began to lose his balance, and Eric jumped forward, tackling the kid over into the aisle and saving him from a 20-foot drop. The crowd actually applauded, but that was short-lived. The kid started screaming, "Help! Help! He's trying to kidnap me!" At the call for help, a couple of men came running from their seats, and Eric held out his hand. He's lying. He just assaulted an old man and stole that crutch from a girl in a cast and made her fall down the stairs. Now back off. Hey, a woman said loudly, that's Eric Keno. The men looked him over and realized it most certainly was Eric Keno. Hey, Eric, so you want me to call security? One said. Thanks, but they've already been called, but you can hand me that crutch over there. The man retrieved the crutch. I'll carry it for you. Where you headed? Out here to check on my girl. The kid was kicking and screaming and doing his best to make a scene, but Eric gave him a hard shake. The boy turned and tried to fight, so Eric picked him up and secured him under his arm and carried him out. At the same time, agents arrived at the front lobby. Jordan? She turned and looked up at the voice. Agent Trout, are you okay? I think so. I scraped up my arm. Eric went to grab the kid. The both looked up as a man carrying Jordan's crutch came up the stairs, followed by young Eric with a kid tucked under his arm. They then turned at another ruckus coming from the right, and Logan appeared, his hand clamped around the arm of the other kid. A couple of agents moved forward to take charge of the two kids. Be careful, they're tricky, Logan warned. Let's move this back into the security conference room, Senior Agent Trout said. They all went to the room and sat the boys down. Pull up the video from the lobby cameras, young Eric said. You'll see they assaulted one of the vendors and then Jordan. They pulled up the video and watched and were trying to get the boys to tell their parents' names when there was another ruckus outside the room. I'm telling you right now, you better open that door and let me see my son, a woman was yelling. Trout placed his phone down to record audio and spoke softly. Let her in. Young Eric watched the classic, my kid can do no wrong scenario unfold. He sighed. He was in a hurry to get back to Gabe's side. Ma'am, your son assaulted two people. I saw it happen both times, and it's on video. I hardly call a little prank assault, she argued. It's not a little prank. He jerked my girl's crutch away from her, and she fell on the stairs. She could have taken a bigger tumble and broken her neck. In other words, it could have killed her, and then your little delinquent would go to jail. So you need to pull back on the reins now before it's too late. I don't know who you think you are, young man, but my husband and I practically own this place. We've been coming here to support all the events for years, and we're golden season ticket holders, and we're on the board that keeps this place running. Eric shook his head. That means nothing to me. Well, it should mean something because I could have you thrown out of here. The whole room got silent. It was Jordan's small snicker that made everyone else laugh. I certainly don't see what's so funny, the woman said. Well, what they're all laughing at is the fact that I actually own this place, or my family does, and it looks like we need to make some changes on who gets on the board. I don't believe you. You're just a kid. I know, right? He said with a grin, making everyone laugh again. Who are you? Ma'am, this is Eric Keno, Agent Trout said, taking great pleasure in the saying. Her face went blank. Oh. Young Eric looked up at Agent Trout. I really need to get back to Gabe. He then looked at Jordan. Do you want to press charges? Jordan smiled. Well, what's your opinion on that? I think if the parents acknowledge the fault of their kids and the kids apologize and the parents apologize, then you might let it slide. But if not, yeah, I think you should press charges because it would be the only way to show these people that their kids are on the verge of making some huge, life-altering choices. But that's just my opinion, and really we need to ask Mr. Cobb if he wants to press charges. Well, do I have to decide right now? Jordan asked. No, you have some time, Trout said. We will, however, begin right away to collect all the witness information and evidence and turn it over to the police. If you want to wait and think about it, that will give the perps time to also think about it and maybe come up with an apology and a plan of action or recompense for damages. Agent Trout looked at the woman. Is your husband here? Yes. Are these both your children? No. She pointed at the one Logan had caught. He's a neighbor and my son's best friend. May I get your name, please? My name is Victoria Dupree, and my husband's name is Kenneth Dupree. Well, Mrs. Dupree, you might want to get your husband in here because depending on what Mr. Cobb says, we may release the boys to your custody, but you will not be able to stay for the event. She gasped. How dare you? We've paid to see this. You paid for the privilege to see the event. You lost the privilege when you allowed your child and his friend to commit crimes on the premises. Regardless of whether they press charges, your family will be escorted from the premises. He turned to Jordan. So, Miss Brooks, would you like to take some time to think about it and maybe discuss it with your lawyer? Jordan smiled at the formality. Oh, yes, I'd like time to think about it, Jordan said finally. I want to know your name, the woman said. She smiled. I'm Jordan Brooks. She looked at Agent Trout. It's so good to see you, Agent Trout, but we do need to get back downstairs. Trout nodded. Escort them, please, he said to two of the agents present. Oh, and Eric. See to Jordan's arm. It's bleeding. Young Eric looked down at her arm and frowned and looked back over at the boys. Boy, I really hope she decides to press charges. Though he really didn't feel any animosity toward the kids, he thought a little fear of consequences was in order. Logan, Jordan, and young Eric took their leave. Young Eric dropped Jordan off at the prayer room, then he and Logan went to Gabe's locker room. They stepped in, and Gabe and the other people there gave them an ovation, everyone except his father and grandfather. Young Eric looked around at the faces. Gabe, Uncle Joey, Jason, Justin, Uncle Cam, Jeff Davis were all smiling. What? Young Eric asked. Cam held up his phone. You were being videoed. Oh. That was some aerial act, son, Ricky said, his voice not sincere. He was not praising him, but rather calling him out. Young Eric looked at him and lowered his head. Sorry, it was instinctive. He jumped up there. I followed. You know, you have an obligation tomorrow. I understand, though, Dad, I really feel like I wasn't in any danger. I get that, but you have to think about the fact that there is a great deal of responsibility resting on your shoulders right now. It's not just about you being able to fight and represent in the Keno Challenge. There are a lot of moving parts to putting this event together, and a lot of people are depending on this event being successful. We have contracts. Remember signing that? Jumping up on that precipice was a breach. Young Eric nodded. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. But I have to say, my balance was perfect. Eric Sr. nodded. Yep. And even Nick Walenda would say that perfect balance is perfect until it's not. So is Jordan okay? Justin asked. Yes, sir. Jeffy's doctoring up her arm right now. She scraped it up when she tried to stop her fall down the stairs. So I heard the mother of one of the kids tried to have you thrown out of the complex, Gabe said with a grin. Young Eric smiled. She spoke about it briefly. And then? Jeff asked. And then he told her who he was, Logan said, and it was awesome. I mean, the look on her face. The group chuckled. Yeah, young Eric began. We have some cleanup we need to do on this place, both in management and on the board of directors. But I'll tell you all about it later. Right now, we need to concentrate on Gabe. He's our focus. Then quit trying to steal his thunder, Cam joked. Grandmaster Keno spoke quietly. Gabe, now that you've had some time to digest, let's start your first warm-up. Gabe nodded and stood, twisted back and forth several times, folded in half and wrapped his arms around his legs, and then reached high, stretching and breathing deeply. He nodded. Let's do it. New scene. It's still Friday. Tanner home, Pine Forest, Georgia. Jericho Jones drove through the open, large iron gate at the end of the Tanner's driveway. It was a long drive that went along past all 8 of the cottages that belonged to the Pine Forest Country Inn next door. The Tanner home was well landscaped. Beautiful lawn, lots of flower beds and hedges and plants and hardscapes. Right now, there were some outside decorations of hay bales and pumpkins and scarecrows. The house itself was large, white, with dark gray trim, and he'd heard that Mr. Tanner had built it himself with the help of his neighbors. Very cool. Jericho parked over to the left of the home, on the side of the driveway in front of a large garage, and headed up the walk and then up the steps of a giant wraparound porch. He started to ring the bell, but the door opened before he could. Rose stood there smiling. Hey, and welcome to our home, she said brightly. Thank you, and your home is really nice. Thank you. Come in, she said as she stood back to let him enter. He stepped inside, and the aromas of dinner being cooked hit him square in the face. Good grief, it smells good in here. Rose giggled. Are you hungry? Well, I am now. He handed her the fall flowers he'd grabbed at the grocery store. Aw, thank you. How sweet. Yep, that's what they all say about me. I bet, she said. I'll put these in a vase. Come on into the kitchen and meet my mom. Jericho followed her into the kitchen, which was on the left front area of the home. A very pregnant and very beautiful woman with blonde hair and big blue eyes turned and smiled at him. He was stunned by her. He wasn't sure what he'd expected, but looking at Rose and all of her sisters that he'd met, he should have known that she would be just as beautiful. Close your mouth, Rose whispered. He did. Sorry. I'm just amazed that your mom is every bit as beautiful as you. Wow, that's a triple word score, Daisy said as she turned from the sink. Jericho chuckled. Triple? You mean double. No, I mean triple. My mom, Rose, and Violet, because when you compliment Rose, you compliment Violet too. Lizzie moved forward, holding out her hand. Thank you for the compliment, Jericho. It's nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you, and I'm grateful that you were there to help Lisa last week. I am too, he said humbly. This is for you. He held out a brown paper bag. Lizzie opened the bag and peeked inside and then looked up with a grin. Jericho Jones, thank you so much. You just scored more points, big time. What is it? Rose asked. Lizzie giggled. It's a couple of chili dogs from Joe's, she said as she rolled the bag close and stuck it in the refrigerator. Rose smiled. Wow, you're good. He shrugged with a grin. Rose motioned toward a high cupboard. Jericho, would you mind opening that cabinet for me and grabbing that large vase? He reached above her head. This one? She shook her head. No, the clear one. Yep, that's it. Thanks. He smiled. So, just curious, what would you have done if I wasn't here? She pointed toward a small aluminum stepladder beside the refrigerator. Hello, Jericho, and welcome to heaven. He turned at the deep voice and smiled. Oh, it's nice to see you, Mr. Tanner, and thank you. It does seem to be a little slice of heaven. The men shook hands. So, you ready to see your son kick some butt? Jericho asked. Keegan nodded. Gabe kicking butt is always a good time. I know that's right, Rose added as she cut stems and arranged the flowers. Jericho watched Mr. Tanner walk over to the stove where Mrs. Tanner was working a potato masher through a large pot of potatoes. He kissed her cheek and took the masher from her. Go sit down, sweetheart, and let me do that. She looked up into his eyes and nodded and went to sit at the large kitchen table. Lily came rushing in through the kitchen door. Hey, everyone. Sorry I'm late, but Jody really needed help at the inn. She's going to have to hire a new kitchen manager because Greta broke her leg when she fell off her horse this morning. Oh, dear, bless her heart, Lizzie said. Lily nodded. I know, right? She smiled up at Jericho. Hello again, Jericho. He smiled. Hello, Lily. It is Lily, right? Daisy laughed. Yes, good job. What needs to be done? Lily asked. Well, the gravy needs to be made, and I need to add some butter and garlic to the green beans. Lily started on the gravy. Daisy started on the green beans. Jericho turned at the shriek of a child. He turned as Violet walked into the kitchen, accompanied by CJ, with Iris riding on his shoulders. Jericho drew a deep breath. He glanced at Rose, who smiled up at him. He guessed it was time for him to see if he could keep the apple cart from spilling. He nodded at CJ. CJ nodded back. Violet smiled warmly. Hello, Jericho. It's nice to see you again. You too, Violet. He then held his hand out to CJ. CJ, good to see you. CJ sighed, paused, while everyone held their breath, and finally he extended his hand. JJ. Jericho looked up at the gorgeous little girl on CJ's shoulders. Hello there, Iris, he said with a smile. Hi, I remember you. You're a fireman. Jericho nodded. That's right. You're very smart. I know, she said matter-of-factly, making everyone chuckle. Me and Violet and CJ been jumping in the leaves. Cool. Violet, CJ, and I, Lizzie corrected. Iris laughed. You didn't jump in the leaves, Mommy. Lizzie laughed. No, I didn't, she said as she stood. Why don't you help me get the table set? Rose carried the vase of flowers to the larger dining room table where they'd be eating. Come on, Jericho, I'll show you around and real quick before we eat. Jericho followed her, glancing once more at CJ. He wished he could have time to speak with him to find out what was going on in his head, but today was not the time or place. Still, he eventually intended to make that happen. Right now, a beautiful blonde was giving him a tour of her home, and he rested his eyes on her. Not a hard thing to do at all. Rose smiled at him. Well, this is the den where we'll watch the fight. He looked around the large room. Everything is so big. Rose shrugged. Well, we have a big family, and it may seem big, but when everyone is here, it gets crowded. Dad is even talking about adding on or building a guest house in the back. Oh, wow, that would be a big project. Yeah, I asked him if he'd do it himself, and he said he didn't have time and he'd hire a good contractor. So, that sounds like it's a done deal. She nodded. I think it is. She took him out back to see the pool and the large yard where a lot of family ball games had been played. She took him downstairs to the workout room and another family room with a pool table and foosball table and ping pong table. You guys have a lot of fun stuff. Rose smiled. Yep, and now that Gabe is gone, it's just all collecting dust. Gabe was like the life of the party, so full of energy and light. He had like a gazillion friends, and they all come over and have giant competitions, and then they'd eat us out of house and home and make a huge mess in the kitchen, and then rush to go help a neighbor or something. You couldn't stay mad at him, mostly 'cause he loves with his whole heart. It sounds like you miss him. Oh, I do. Terribly. I feel like some old mom who wants to go back in time because her children are all grown. Gabe is such a bright light that when he's gone, it feels dark and gray. He turned to her and touched her nose. Well, Rose Anderson, I think you are a bright light. She smiled, not hardly. Yes, you are. When you walk in a room, it gets brighter. And you're powerful. You're like, I don't know, a force to be reckoned with, I guess. He looked into her eyes. You're a light that I can't look away from. I'm like a moth to a flame. Oh, then you'd better be careful, she said with a laugh. He shook his head. I'm not afraid. I'm a firefighter, he joked. You might challenge me, but you don't scare me. What you do is intrigue me. And besides all of that, you can melt me with just one of your smiles. Wow. I mean, those are some strong words. I know, he said with a sigh. And the strange thing is I don't usually say things like that, but you're different than any girl I've ever met. Your beauty, your strength, your faith. It's all very intriguing, and it makes me want to do things I've never done before. Her eyes opened wide, but she didn't inquire what those things were. Well, Jericho Jones, you intrigue me too. He smiled. Good. I'm glad to know it's not one-sided. She looked away when her phone buzzed and pulled it out of her back jean pocket. Well, hello there, Taylor Keno. New scene. We're back to the Rosewood Sports Arena in Los Angeles, California. Once Gabe had been through his pre-fight routine, he and his team, Grandmaster Keno, Ricky Keno, Eric Keno, Logan Adams, Cam Wallace, Jeff Davis, Joey Adams, and Jason and Justin Lee, made their way to the prayer room. They were all hugged and greeted by their spouses or girlfriends. They talked for a few minutes, allowing everyone to speak whatever words of encouragement they wanted to speak to Gabe. Taylor raised her phone. Hey, Gabe, there's some people here that want to speak to you. Gabe looked up at her phone and saw his family. Kick butt. You go, boy. Work hard. Don't give up. Give it your all, were some of the things he heard yelled at him. He grinned and gave them a thumbs up. I promise to do my best. We're about to pray, Ricky said to Gabe's family. Stay on the call and you can participate. Awesome, they said. I want to pray, Iris called out, making the crowd chuckle. Hush now, Iris, they heard someone say. No, let her pray, Grandmaster Keno said softly. They stood in a circle and linked hands. They heard, Okay, Iris, go ahead and say your prayer, sweetie, but this is not a prayer for the food. This is prayer for Gabe. Go ahead, they can hear you on the phone. Okay, she said in her tiny voice. Dear Father, please bless Gabe, 'cause I miss him, and I love him. Keep him safe. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen, they all echoed. Can I pray too? Angelina said softly. Absolutely, baby girl, Grandmaster Keno replied. Go ahead. Dear God, please bless Gabe, and I love him too. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen, they all said again. They heard a sniff and looked up at Gabe. He used his thumb to wipe at his eyes. Are you like crying? Logan asked with a grin. Gabe shrugged. I mean, two little girls just told God that they loved me. It kind of got to me. The group laughed, and young Eric rubbed the top of Gabe's head. You know what, Gabe? I love you too, just 'cause you recognized how cool that was. They all laughed again. Okay, it's my turn, Grandmaster Keno said. He prayed over the entire group, over the event, over the attendees, and over Gabe. And when he finished, they were all ready. The ladies and children and Desi and Alec all headed out to the arena, but Gabe grabbed Taylor and pulled her aside. One more for luck, he asked. She smiled. You can have as many as you want. He took her in his arms and kissed her soundly. Let's move it, Romeo, young Eric said. Gabe laughed, released her, and watched everyone leave the room. The crowd out in the arena got excited as the masses pointed, recognizing that Gabe's people were coming out to their seats. The arena was full. Sports networks were present and live on air. Social media was buzzing, and the mini-mart was trending. The entire female teen world was holding its breath, waiting for the moment that Gabe would make his appearance. So far, they and the rest of the viewers had seen an amazing display of martial arts skills put on by 3 different groups. One of those groups was from Keno Martial Arts of Kansas City. Another was from Xander Zendo-Rue Martial Arts of Virginia, run by a former student of Grandmaster Keno. The third group was Yun Taekwondo from Austin, Texas. All 3 groups put on extraordinary demonstrations of skill and discipline and humor, and all of it was put to music to make it fast-paced and entertaining. The pre-tournament entertainment didn't stop there. Gymnasts from several colleges, both male and female, gave floor exercise demonstrations that were blowing people's minds. Their strength and skill was mesmerizing. Now, currently, everyone in the crowd heard a single, very loud, very strong, very beautiful female voice singing, coming from somewhere in the arena. Of course, the cameramen knew where to point their cameras, and everyone looked up at the jumbotron as they watched the flash mob begin. The words the single voice sang, I got a feeling tonight's gonna be a good night. I'm not gonna sing this one. Tonight's gonna be a good night. Tonight's gonna be a good, good night. Then a few more people joined in, and they began walking down onto the arena floor. Suddenly, there were 10 more, and the song switched to Don't Stop Believin', to Don't Stop Believin', and more joined as the floor was filled with 100 singers. Then the music switched again, and the singers ran out toward the edge of the floor to make room for the huge group that came to take over the center of the floor. The new music was Can't Stop the Feelin' by Justin Timberlake, and the singers that took over the middle of the floor were obviously also dancers. The people in the crowd were jumping up and down, clapping and cheering. The entire spectacle was thrilling, as most flash mobs are. When the song ended, the crowd thought it was over, but then they heard drums. The flash mob parted, and a drum line from 3 different Los Angeles area high schools, all in uniform, all very handsome, made their way onto the floor and gave a superb demonstration of their skills. At the very end, the beginning music of Eye of the Tiger came over the sound system. The drum line divided in 2 and raised their drumsticks in the air to portray a kind of Arch of Sabers ceremony. Finally, Tony Omori and his team from Williams Brothers Karate walked out under the drummer's arch. The crowd stood and applauded for the fighter. He and his team walked through the arch and stood alongside the 30-foot by 30-foot square ring with ropes. Omori lifted his arms in the air and hopped around a bit, nodding at the crowd as they applauded him. Then the crowd seemed to hold their breath for a few seconds as they waited, then jumped to their feet, screaming, whistling, and yelling as Gabe's team came in, walking in a single file line. Gabe was third to the last, with Grandmaster Keno and Ricky Keno behind him. The roar of the crowd was deafening, so much so that the moms were having their children put their hands over their ears. Gabe's team lined up on the opposite side of the ring. Gabe looked up briefly and smiled and tapped his hand on his chest to show gratitude for the heartfelt welcome. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the national anthem," the announcer said. The song was being sung by a young girl Gabe recognized. She was the 14-year-old powerhouse from American Idol last year. She didn't win, but she was still awesome. She held the mic to her lips and began to sing. Gabe stood with his hand over his heart and looked up at the flag flying on the jumbotron. He glanced around to see if there were any military guys standing at attention and saluting. He spotted a few and smiled. It always made him feel good. Then he looked again and realized the Ameritech agents were also standing at attention and saluting, and his heart soared. The anthem ended, and the announcer walked into the middle of the ring and began by welcoming everyone to the event. He then introduced the judges, the timekeeper, the scorekeeper, and referee. All proceeds from today's event will go to 3 different organizations: Dr. Juneflower Kino's Heal the World Foundation, Angel Lee's Angel Network Foundation, that works with women and children in precarious situations, and last but not least, the Gabe Tanner Foundation that works with our youth across the nation. Let's give a hand to the people that run these foundations. The announcer waited for the applause, then went on. "Ladies and gentlemen, I will now introduce tonight's competitors. First, for Team Tony, Sensei Edward Williams. Sensei Aaron Williams. Trainers Hiro Takahashi, Sam Ito, and Jay Ito. And in the red trunks, at the height of 5 feet 11 and 1/2 inches, weighing in at 189 pounds, 19-year-old Tony Mori. He stopped and waited for the applause to die down as Tony raised both his hands in the air and turned in a slow circle to acknowledge the entire crowd. "And now, for Team Gabe," he said, and had to wait a few seconds to hear himself speak. "Grandmaster Eric Kino. Grandmaster Ricky Kino. Master Eric Kino III. Master Joey Adams. Master Logan Adams. Trainers Jeff Davis, Cam Wallace, Jason Lee, and Justin Lee, also all masters. And in the black trunks." The crowd was so loud he had to stop again. "In the black trunks, at the height of 6 feet 1 inch, weighing in at 181 pounds, 18-year-old Gabe Tanner." Gabe stepped out, raised one hand in the air, smiled and waved, and he too turned in a slow circle. Gabe then headed over to Tony's team and bowed to each of them, while Tony did the same to Gabe's team. After that, Logan, young Eric, Justin, Jason, and Cam went to sit with their girls, while Ricky, Jeff, and Joey stayed ringside. The fighters entered the ring and went to their corner. Grandmaster Kino stood in front of Gabe and looked into his eyes. "You ready?" "Yes, sir." "You focused?" "Yes, sir." "Opening move?" Gabe spoke it automatically without having to think about it. "Energy?" "Good to go." Grandmaster Kino nodded. Gabe drew a deep breath. Grandmaster Kino, I just want to say thank you for training me, for working so hard with me. I'm honored that I can learn from you." He stepped back a step and then bowed slowly and deeply. Grandmaster Kino bowed also and then smiled and reached up and musked Gabe's hair. Taylor smiled at the gesture, and there was a murmur from the crowd showing that they were intently watching every single thing Gabe did. Jordan leaned over to Taylor. "That was so sweet." "I know, right?" I can't wait to ask Gabe exactly what he said. On the large screen TV in the Tanner's home, the announcer on ESPN even acknowledged the moment. "Nice. What a tremendous show of respect and honor shown to Grandmaster Kino." "No wonder this young man is so popular," the other announcer said. Rose smiled. My bro. I can't even. The others in the room agreed. Keegan watched intently and silently. The young men moved to the center, bowed to the referee, bowed to each other, and the fight began. Gabe struck first, fast and hard, with his very first sequence. The crowd at the arena was going crazy. The crowd at Joe's was out of their chairs. The crowd at the Stewart's startled the babies. The crowd at the inn was only slightly more reserved. The roar of the crowd at the arena was deafening. Young Eric, Logan, Jeff's boys, and the rest of the Keno family were on their feet cheering. Gabe blocked a few incoming punches and kicks. Tony was having a hard time landing anything because Gabe was so quick. Every sequence that Gabe used in the first round, he scored. Melody leaned over to Logan when the boys went to their corners to rest after the first round. How many rounds are they going to go? 7, Logan said. 7 3-minute rounds with 1 minute in between each round, though some of those 1-minute rest periods will be longer because of TV. Melody nodded but frowned. 7 rounds? That seems like a lot. Oh, it is a lot. Usually a match would go no more than 3 rounds like in the Olympics. This is a real test of strength and endurance, and the crowd is willing to pay to see it because it's not just going to be over in a few minutes. Unless Gabe knocks out his opponent, Melody said. Logan smiled. Yep, that could happen. And after that first round, I think it's a distinct possibility tonight. So then the crowd will be disappointed that the fight was so short. Well, seeing a knockout is usually not disappointing in itself. But the Kenos have been thinking about ways to make this event even more entertaining. How? Well, like they're thinking about adding a second. Like, if either fighter knocks out the other before the 4th round, they will face the second fighter, a fighter chosen to step in and fight the rest of the match. Well, that doesn't seem fair. Logan smiled. I'll tell you about it in 3 minutes, he said, as Gabe and Tony headed back out to the fight. The second round went about like the first. Gabe connected with some devastating kicks, and Tony didn't connect. And when the bell rung, the boys headed back to their corners. Okay, Melody said, let's get back to our discussion. Doesn't it seem unfair that if you knock out someone, you have to face another guy? A guy who's fresh? He grinned. I understand what you're saying. It's not unfair if those are the rules. Remember, it's a test of their skills. So let's say they were using those rules tonight. Knowing he would have to face a fresh opponent if he knocks this guy out now, Gabe would want to control the fight and not knock out his opponent until the 4th round. So it would take more skill and more thought and more control. I think it would be an awesome rule. Melody smiled at Logan. Would you ever consider fighting in a mini-mart? He shook his head. No, because it's for black belts only. Aren't you a black belt? I thought you were. I'm a 3rd-degree black belt. I could fight in a Keno challenge, but not in this. This is strictly for young fighters, and this will be Gabe's last one. Why? He's only 18. He grinned. Because he doesn't know it yet, but Granddad is going to promote him to 2nd degree after this fight. The fighters rose from their corners and headed out for the 3rd round. New scene. At the Tanner house, Rose was pacing back and forth behind the sofa. Lizzie was biting her lip. Keegan stood motionless against a wall. Jericho was smiling. Man, oh man, he's doing great, he said. He glanced at CJ, who actually nodded at him in agreement. Lena decided to FaceTime Daisy because she knew Rose would be too freaked out to talk. He's doing so good, Lena said. Dad says he's got this in the bag. Oh, Bugs, don't say stuff like that, Daisy said. Why? You worried about jinxing him? Jinxes don't work on Gabe. He's got a higher power on his side. Daisy giggled. Lily looked at her phone as she got a FaceTime call, too. Hey, Heather. He's doing awesome, Heather squealed. He is. I hope he keeps it up. My heart is beating 1,000,000 beats per minute. How's Rose? Lily turned her phone to show Rose pacing. Her usual place, Heather said with a laugh. Lighten up, Rose. He's doing great. Rose nodded but didn't speak. So, who's the hunk on the couch there? That's Jericho Jones, Rose's new friend. Lily turned her phone to Jericho. Jericho, meet our oldest sister, Heather. She lives up in Tennessee. Jericho smiled and waved at the camera. Hey, Heather. Well, hello there, Jericho. Let me see, a voice said, and Heather handed her phone to Nolan. Hey, man, I'm Nolan, Heather's fiance. Good to meet you. Hello, Nolan. Nice to sort of meet you, too. Meanwhile, up in Athens, Georgia, on the UGA campus, there was another big watch party going on. Peyton Murphy and his teammates were giddy over the match so far. Peyton had done nothing but brag on his friend Gabe ever since he'd been at school. Several of them had known about Gabe from earlier in the year when he'd been abducted, and when they found out Peyton was from Pine Forest, Georgia, they asked if he knew Gabe Tanner. Peyton had been happy to report that he and Gabe were best friends, and he confirmed that Gabe really was the great guy he seemed to be, even letting them know that the truck Peyton was driving actually belonged to Gabe. The team members had stood by Peyton's side when Gabe had been shot and almost died, and many of them even prayed with him, some praying for the very first time in their lives, and since then had changed their ways and become followers of Jesus. Gabe's light had reached all the way across the country to Athens, Georgia. The ESPN announcers had gone off on a spiel about Gabe's history and the rough year he'd had, about last spring's mini-mart, about his abduction, about his throat being cut while on the beach with his girlfriend, and about his saving that girlfriend, who was Ricky Keno's and Brianna Adams' daughter, from being taken, and Gabe getting shot and stabbed in the process. They spoke about his foundation and the good works he was doing. Then they went on to talk about Tony O'Maury and the rough life he'd had and how lucky he'd been to be selected to fight against Gabe, though at the moment he didn't look so lucky. Back in the Rosewood Sports Arena, the crowd was going wild, and by the end of the fourth round, Gabe had blocked every single punch and kick Tony had thrown. On the other hand, Gabe had landed dozens and sent Tony down a few times. Gabe went back to his corner and spoke to Grandmaster Keno. Everyone watched the close-up on the Jumbotron. Gabe was shaking his head. Grandmaster Keno nodded his head and put a hand on Gabe's shoulder. Gabe was breathing hard. He drew several deep breaths, drank some water, dried his face with the towel that Jeff handed to him. Fifth round, very first move, Gabe blocked 2 punches and a kick coming in, spun and kicked Tony in the head, and he went down. Everyone thought the fight was over, but Tony stood back up. The referee restarted the fight, and Gabe moved forward and offered Knuckles to Tony. Tony hit Knuckles and nodded to whatever Gabe said. The rest of the fifth round, Gabe never threw another punch. Up in Athens, one of Peyton's teammates got frustrated. "What's he doing?" Peyton shrugged with a smile. "He's putting in the second string." In Pine Forest, Rose sat down next to Jericho. He smiled at her. "You're good now?" She nodded and breathed a sigh of relief. Keegan looked around at his family. "They're going to need to find a stronger fighter to face anyone that the Kenos train." Lizzie nodded. "I agree. The last mini-mart, they were both trained by Keno Martial Arts, and it was a tough match. If they're going to bring in someone else, it's going to have to be someone really good. Putting anyone up against Keno Martial Arts is a gamble. I mean, look at the Keno challenges. No Keno student has ever lost. And Grandmaster Keno participated in 4 marts, and each time he did, he won." "Well, it looks like Grandmaster Keno developed a model that is unbeatable," Rose said. "Well, nothing is unbeatable, but it's pretty darn close," Keegan put in. "The Kenos are definitely impressive," Jericho said. "I'd love to meet them one day." "Oh, you will, because they're coming to join us for Thanksgiving," Lizzie said with a grin. "Really?" Daisy asked. Lizzie nodded. "When did this happen?" Lily asked. "Bree called me last night to accept our invitation to come and help at the center and share Thanksgiving with us and a bunch of people who are struggling. They were all in, and guess what? They bought the old Patchett house over on Magnolia, just outside of town." Violet smiled. "I love that old house, but I thought someone else bought it about a year ago." "Yeah, they did. It was a real estate company that flips houses, and now the Kenos are going to be able to come here a lot more often, and they're going to add some cottages on the property like the inn did, and they might even let Lisa and Jody handle renting out the cottages when the Kenos aren't in town." The family turned from their conversation to watch the end of the fight. They watched the celebration. They watched Gabe receive a golden champion belt. They watched Gabe shake hands with and hug Tony O'Maury, bow to Tony's senseis, and then turn and bow to both Grandmaster Kenos. The camera stayed on him as he was handed a microphone and asked some questions. "How you feel, Gabe?" an ESPN rep asked. "I feel good, and I'm grateful that I was able to do the mini mart again. That first one, it's kind of what started everything for me this year." "But it's been a hard year, hasn't it?" "Yes, sir, it's been hard, but everything has happened has made me a better person, stronger, and it makes me more grateful than ever, and it makes me appreciate the most important things." "And what things are the most important to you, Gabe Tanner?" "God, my family." He turned toward the stands with a smile. "My girl Taylor, her family, my friends. Oh, and speaking of my friends, shout out to Peyton Murphy and his teammates on the baseball team over at UGA. Go Dogs." "Anyway, and just people, all of these people," he said as he gestured toward the crowd. "And like all the people, all the kids on social media who've watched me and helped me and supported me and prayed for me during this year. They are the best Jesus warriors there are, and I'm grateful for them." He nodded over at Tony. "And thanks to Tony and Williams Brothers Karate for coming down here from San Fran for this little event." The announcer motioned to Tony to join them. Tony moved forward and Gabe hugged him again. "Tony, what would you like to say?" Tony smiled. "It was an honor to come and fight this guy," he said, putting an arm around Gabe's shoulders. "I thought he can't possibly be as good as everyone says he is. Well, he's great, and it's going to take someone a lot more experienced than me to beat him. He did a great job, and I am humbled." The announcer nodded his head. "Thanks, guys, and there you have it. We'll see everyone back here tomorrow night at the Keno Challenge and see if Eric Keno III, the son of Ricky Keno, can continue his father's legacy. Back to you, Bart," he said, speaking to the ESPN anchors. Though the anchors spoke, the camera stayed on Gabe as he made his way over to Taylor. He stood in front of her. "I'm really sweaty." "I don't care," she said as she threw her arms around him and kissed him in front of everyone. At the Tanner home, Rose smiled up at the screen. "My little brother. He's so in love with Taylor." "Do you approve?" Jericho asked. "Oh, yeah. She's about the sweetest thing. Not all spoiled and bratty like you'd think. And she is so in love with Gabe. They're a match made in heaven." Lizzie sighed as Keegan helped her to get up off the couch. "It wouldn't surprise me a bit if they ended up getting married," she said. "They're a little young, aren't they?" Jericho asked. "Yes," Keegan answered, "and they'll wait a little longer. But I'm thinking it won't be that long, because when you know, you know." Jericho nodded his head and glanced at Rose, then looked over at CJ, who was smiling at Violet as she spoke to him. "Who would like some dessert?" Lizzie asked. "I think we all would," Keegan answered, "and we'll all get it. You can sit in the kitchen and supervise." She smiled and nodded, placing her arm under her belly as if she were helping to carry the load. And while everyone in many households in Pine Forest went to have a celebratory late snack up at UGA, Peyton glowed with satisfaction at Gabe's shout-out, while his teammates were making bawdy comments about how his love life is about to improve. And that is the end of chapter 18. Fun stuff.